It's 3:24 a.m. in a nearly empty hotel. A young woman in a blue jacket steps out of an elevator, sways, presses her hand to a wall, and keeps walking. The footage is grainy. She looks lost. Within 24 hours, her mother will be told her body was found inside a walk-in freezer. Her name is Kenneka Jenkins. She was 19. This is still unanswered. Hi, I'm Maya Ellison. Welcome back to Still Unanswered. This episode is about the night Kenneka Jenkins went missing, the footage that captured her last movements, the questions that followed, and the settlement the family finally reached years later. With me is Dr. Andre Collins, a criminologist and former public defender who studies policing, institutional responsibility, and how race and class shape investigations. Andre, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Maya. I appreciate the space to talk about this. It's heavy work, but important.
Andre, before we go deep, I want to put a clear frame around our approach. This episode is somber. We're centering Kenneka as a person, her family, her life, and interrogating institutional failures without indulging in unproven conspiracies. The public record is messy, and some footage remains non-public. We'll be careful about what we assert as fact, okay?
Absolutely. That's the right posture. We owe it to Kenneka and her family to be exact, skeptical in a good way, and humane.
Good. Let's start where we should. Who was Kenneka? She was born May 27, 1998, and grew up on Chicago's West Side. She was 19 when she died in September 2017. Her mother is Teresa Martin. Friends and family described Kenneka as someone who, this matters, had a low tolerance for alcohol. Teresa told a 911 dispatcher later that 1 cup is too much for her. That small detail ends up being important when we look at the surveillance and toxicology. Andre, why does that matter?
It matters because context shapes plausibility. If a family member says their loved one has a low tolerance to alcohol, that affects how we interpret footage of unsteady walking or falling. It doesn't answer all questions, far from it, but it's a piece of the puzzle. Someone who gets intoxicated faster is more vulnerable to disorientation, memory lapses, and impaired motor function, all of which can explain how a person might wander into a restricted area. At the same time, we have to weigh that against institutional responses. Did anyone do anything to prevent the risk?
Right. Vulnerability plus an environment with unsecured hazards equals danger. Which brings us to the setting, the Crowne Plaza near O'Hare in Rosemont. It's a big hotel with back-of-house areas, kitchens, coolers, freezers, spaces that are not for the public. But that night, a party was happening in a guest room. The room was later reported to have been booked using a fraudulent card. Allegedly, over 30 people were at the party, and there's a Facebook Live clip where Kenneka appears. Around 1:15 a.m., she arrives with 3 young women, per surveillance. Between 1:30 and 3:20 a.m., she's in the party room. Andre, the timeline gets very precise from here. Let's walk through that timeline carefully.
Okay. The timeline we have is synthesized from police reports, media coverage, and surveillance footage. At roughly 3:24 a.m., the cameras capture Kenneka coming out of an elevator. She appears very intoxicated, stumbling, swaying, bumping into walls. She's alone. Around 3:30 a.m., she's filmed walking hallways, nearly falling over a railing, doubling back, entering and exiting side rooms. At about 3:32 a.m., she's recorded entering a back-of-house kitchen area. That is the last publicly released clear footage of her alive. The publicly available clips do not show her actually entering the freezer itself. They show her entering the kitchen, moving toward where the cooler and freezer were located. Non-public footage, according to activists and people the police showed, allegedly shows her entering the cooler/freezer area alone. But that footage has not been fully released to the public.
That lack of full public footage is one of the things that kept this case alive in the public imagination. The family, and many others, asked, if the footage shows her going into the freezer alone, why not show it in full? Why hold back? Some of those answers are procedural, ongoing investigation, privacy concerns, but the withholding fed suspicion.
Exactly. And when you have a grieving family and a public already mistrustful of institutions, any delay or partial release becomes a vacuum that will be filled by speculation. That's human. It's also why transparency protocols matter, especially for high-profile, emotionally charged cases.
Let's pause and hear the immediate reaction to the footage as it circulated. There was shock. People online, Black social media communities, true crime forums, scrutinized every frame. Then, around midday the same day, Kenneka's friends call her mom, saying they can't find her, and they have her keys and phone. Teresa goes to the hotel. She calls police. The 911 dispatcher reportedly said to give it some time, that Kenneka could be passed out somewhere after drinking. Andre, explain how missing person protocols normally work and why the initial response matters.
Sure. Missing person protocols vary across departments, but generally there's an assessment age, vulnerability, circumstances. A 19-year-old reported missing after leaving a crowded party, intoxicated, and possibly without a phone is typically considered high risk. Many departments will prioritize active searches, camera checks, and coordination with the property. In this case, there's a reported delay. Teresa was advised to wait. The hotel initially said it needed a police report before reviewing cameras, and the official missing person report wasn't filed until close to 1 p.m. If there's a gap of hours between the last known sighting and an active facility-wide search, a window for rescue, if rescue were possible, can close.
That gap becomes an anguish point for the family. The body was found roughly 21 hours after the last clear footage, somewhere around 12:30 a.m. Sunday. Someone found Kenneka inside a walk-in freezer within a walk-in cooler in an unused kitchen area. She was lying on her side. The freezer was operational and cold. The Cook County medical examiner later ruled cause of death as accidental hypothermia, and toxicology showed a blood alcohol level around 0.112 and the presence of topiramate. Andre, topiramate is not a recreational drug. It's an anti-epileptic and migraine medication. The family says she was never prescribed it. What does the presence of topiramate suggest medically and for the investigation?
Medically, topiramate can cause dizziness, cognitive impairment, and reduced coordination, especially when combined with alcohol. From an investigative standpoint, the presence of a medication the family says she wasn't prescribed raises immediate questions. How did it get in her system? Possibilities include someone giving it to her intentionally or unintentionally, pill sharing, for example, or she took it without family knowledge. But we must be cautious. There was no evidence presented that conclusively demonstrated someone intentionally drugged her. It's an unanswered item. For the medical conclusion, the combination of alcohol and a sedative medication increases susceptibility to hypothermia and might explain rapid incapacitation in a cold environment.
So, the official medical conclusion is accidental death by hypothermia, with intoxication and the medication as contributing factors. There was little evidence of violent trauma. The police interviewed dozens of people and said they had no evidence of foul play. Yet the family and many in the public felt there were institutional failures: hotel security, the delayed search, camera access. The family later filed a wrongful death lawsuit. Andre, walk us through what the lawsuit alleged and what it eventually found.
The family's 2018 lawsuit alleged the hotel and its security and the restaurant leasing the kitchen failed in several duties. They didn't secure the kitchen and freezer area, allowing access to an obviously dangerous space. They failed to shut down an allegedly fraudulent, overcrowded party. They didn't promptly search or review security footage when Kenneka was missing. The suit sought $50 million and alleged negligence. Litigation later revealed the defendants were found negligent on several points, particularly about securing the kitchen and not reviewing footage in time. Ultimately, in late 2023, the parties reached a confidential settlement, reportedly valued in the millions. Public reporting referenced figures around $10 million, with a net of roughly $6.4 million to the family after fees. The key legal nuance: a settlement and findings of negligence are not the same as an admission of homicide or intentional wrongdoing. They do, however, suggest the court found serious failures in duty of care.
That distinction matters a lot to people. Settlements can be read as corporate risk management. They can also be read as an acknowledgement that something went wrong that might have been prevented. For Teresa, the settlement was relief, but not full closure. She said she still had unanswered questions. Let's talk about the freezer itself, details that became important in the public debate. There was talk of external locks, internal release handles, and whether the freezer could be opened from the inside. What does the record show?
Court records and reporting showed the freezer was a walk-in unit inside a walk-in cooler. Early statements by some in the family's legal team suggested an external locking mechanism that could have trapped Kenneka. Later discovery clarified that the specific freezer did not have an external padlock. It had a latch and an internal white circular safety release designed to open from the inside. And records indicate that internal release was functioning. So the question becomes, if an internal safety handle existed and worked, why didn't she use it? There are plausible reasons: darkness, confusion, intoxication, panic, or loss of consciousness. We can't know for sure. But technically, the unit had a safety release.
One of the hardest things is imagining being in that state, intoxicated, possibly medicated, in a dark, cold compartment, maybe panicking, and not being able to figure out the handle. I keep thinking of the physical details: metal surfaces, cold seeping through clothes, the opacity of panic. The family's argument is less about whether Kenneka by herself entered the freezer and more about why a guest could access such a dangerous spot in the first place, and why staff and police didn't find her earlier. That's negligence territory. But the public also spun up a lot of alternative theories: homicide by party attendees, organ trafficking, hotel staff cover-up. Andre, help me talk about why those theories took hold and what they say about trust.
They took hold because humans hate uncertainty, and because there's a long history of institutions failing Black communities. In Chicago especially, high-profile incidents where authorities or businesses appeared to dismiss or mishandle cases of harm have primed people to distrust official narratives. When you have a grieving parent, partial footage, social media amplification, and delayed transparency, people will search for explanations that assign culpability. Some of those explanations are grounded, like the argument the hotel should have secured dangerous areas. But others are speculative and sometimes racist or lurid, like organ trafficking narratives. Those thrive when people feel the system won't protect them or render the truth.
Right. It's the interplay of evidence, doubt, and an emotional need for accountability. The activist Andrew Holmes played a role early on. He said police showed him footage that made him conclude she wandered in alone. But Teresa later said she didn't feel represented by his statements. The family pushed for transparency, but also criticized online theories that shifted blame onto partygoers without evidence. We should be clear, many of the explosive online claims were never substantiated by forensics or police. At the same time, the hotel's actions, delays, access issues, were found negligent in court. That tension is the core of this story.
Exactly. On one hand, you have forensic findings consistent with an accident, no evidence of significant trauma, no sexual assault. On the other, you have procedural failures that likely made rescue impossible. Both can be true at once.
Yeah, both are true. Let's slow down and walk listeners through that afternoon and evening after the last footage. Teresa and family knock on doors. The hotel calls police on them for that. There's friction. Police finally return to the hotel around 6 p.m., and camera review ramps up. Someone, reportedly, enters the kitchen area around 8:30 p.m., but leaves without opening the freezer. Then, hours later, someone, staff or security, returns and finds Kenneka's body inside. There are multiple decisions and actions that, if different, might have led to a rescue. Andre, from a systems perspective, what are the clear failures?
3 systemic failures stand out. 1. Access control. An industrial freezer in an unused kitchen should be secured when not in use, especially in a hotel setting where guests can get lost. 2. Incident response. When a vulnerable young person is reported missing, rapid, broad searches of the facility and prioritized camera review are critical. Waiting for an official missing person report or relying on bureaucratic thresholds can cost time. 3. Communication protocols between hotel staff and police. If hotel staff are hesitant to search or to turn over footage without a report, and if police are giving advice to wait rather than mobilize searches, the system is not aligned to protect guests.
The family's grief is palpable in their public statements. Teresa saying she had her daughter's keys and phone. She knew Kenneka wasn't the type to disappear that way, and yet she was counseled to relax. That has resonance for many families who feel dismissed. Listeners, I want to give you a concrete sense of time. Last clear camera sighting at about 3:32 a.m. Body found nearly 21 hours later. If even a few hours earlier the full facility had been searched or the footage promptly reviewed, the outcome could have been different. Of course, we can't retroactively prove that, but it's what the family believes.
And legally, that belief formed the basis of a negligence claim that succeeded to the point of settlement. The court's findings about negligence, failure to secure the area, failure to stop the illegal party, not timely reviewing cameras, are significant. They don't prove intentional harm, but they do mean the defendants failed in duties owed to Kenneka as a guest.
Let's talk about the medical examiner's autopsy for a moment. The ruling came October 6, 2017. Cause of death, accidental hypothermia. There was a BAC of 0.112 over the legal limit, and topiramate was in her system. No illegal drugs were found. little traumatic injury consistent with violent assault. The ME concluded hypothermia was the cause. Some people ask, how quickly does hypothermia set in? Could someone be conscious and aware but unable to use the safety handle? Help us understand the physiology.
Hypothermia onset depends on temperature, clothing, body mass, wetness, and metabolic factors. In a commercial walk-in freezer, temperatures can be well below freezing. Hypothermia can set in much faster than outdoors in cold weather. Alcohol causes vasodilation and a false sense of warmth while increasing heat loss. It also impairs judgment. Certain medications can blunt shivering and other protective responses. Someone who's intoxicated and medicated can become incapacitated quickly, sometimes in minutes to an hour or two, depending on conditions. So yes, physiologically, it's plausible that an intoxicated and medicated person might not be able to operate a handle or find their way in the dark before losing consciousness.
That medical plausibility is often buried in the noise of conspiracy. People want definitive proof of foul play, or they want a clean narrative of negligence. The reality is more complicated, a confluence of vulnerability, an unsecured hazard, delayed institutional response, and an outcome that was tragic and, according to the ME, accidental. Now, the community reaction, online sleuths, protests, calls to release all footage, grew quickly. There were protests outside the hotel. Some voices pushed back against conspiracy theories and urged restraint. What does that dynamic tell us about public trust and the media environment?
It tells us that social media is a double-edged sword. It can amplify legitimate cause for transparency and put pressure on institutions to act. But it can also amplify speculation and distract from concrete accountability. The Jenkins case shows both. Social pressure kept scrutiny on the police and hotel, contributing to public interest and legal action. At the same time, speculative narratives sometimes ensnared witnesses and a family in toxic debate. The lesson is that transparency, combined with prompt, clear communication, is the best way to build trust and reduce speculation.
One person who tried to provide clarity was Andrew Holmes, a community activist who said police showed him footage that, in his view, showed no foul play, Kenneka simply wandering in alone. The family later said Holmes didn't speak for them. That disagreement between an activist and the family became part of the story. Public advocacy can help, but it can also complicate a family's grieving process when outsiders speak loudly with incomplete mandates. Andre, how should community activists and politicians engage in such cases?
With humility and deference to the family's wishes, first and foremost. Activists play a critical role in pushing for transparency, but they also must avoid speaking for the family unless invited. Ideally, they coordinate with families, amplify requests for full footage release, demand independent review when appropriate, and protect the integrity of the investigation. Loudness alone is not always helpful. Credibility and procedural rigor are important.
Let's get specific about the legal outcome. The wrongful death suit alleged negligence and sought $50 million. By late 2023, a settlement was reached and sealed. Public reporting put figures in the millions, with a reported net of $6.4 million to the family after fees. The settlement terms were sealed, and the court cited concerns about ongoing threats and misinformed speculation. From a legal and public policy view, what does a settlement like this accomplish, and what does it not accomplish?
A settlement often provides financial relief and public acknowledgement that litigation proved something worth paying to resolve. It spares families further litigation costs, depositions, and appeals. but it typically does not produce full public disclosure of all investigative materials, nor does it necessarily create criminal accountability. It can bring institutional changes if part of the settlement includes policy reforms, but those are often private. So it's a mixed bag. Monetary justice without full truth in the public domain, unless the settlement explicitly requires disclosures or policy changes.
And families still come away wanting answers that money can't buy. Teresa's comment, she wanted answers she hadn't received, resonates. Before we move toward the unresolved questions and what this case means for broader themes, I want to let you react, Andre, to some of the main unanswered items I'll list. How did she end up in the freezer? Did she go alone, or was she outside camera view and pushed? How did Tapiranote get in her system? Could she have been saved if the search had been faster? Were law enforcement and hotel responses shaped by bias? And what exactly is on the non-public footage? Your quick read?
Short answer, all of those are valid, unresolved questions. Longer answer, based on the public record, the most plausible is that she entered the area alone. Surveillance, activist viewing, and ME findings support that narrative. The Tapiranote remains unexplained in public records. The delay in searching almost certainly removed any plausible rescue window. Bias is harder to prove, but systemic patterns and the family's experience dovetail with larger patterns of differential urgency in missing person cases for Black women. And about non-public footage, without access, we cannot adjudicate claims made by various parties, which is why the demand for transparency matters.
That demand for transparency is central to the still unanswered framing of this podcast. We can't resolve every doubt, but we can hold up the institutional failures that the court found and press for learning. Let's step back and compare Kenneka's case to other hotel infrastructure deaths. People might recall Elisa Lam at the Cecil Hotel in 2013. There are similarities. Bizarre surveillance footage, off-limits places, massive public speculation. What does comparing these cases teach us?
It teaches us that hotel environments, large, labyrinthine, with restricted industrial areas, pose unique risks, especially when combined with intoxication or mental health crises. It also teaches us that opaque institutions plus evocative footage equals fertile ground for conspiracy. The proper response is better design and policy. Secure restricted areas, train staff to act on missing person reports promptly, and have clear processes for footage release that respect privacy but allow independent review in suspicious deaths.
Design, policy, training. Those are the practical steps. For listeners who want concrete reforms, secure off-limits areas physically when not in use. Implement immediate search protocols for vulnerable missing persons. Require hotels to cooperate with police camera review quickly. Invest in staff training on how to respond to missing guest reports, especially when intoxication is involved. And create external oversight where needed. Andre, anything to add?
Also, require documentation of timestamps on footage reviews, and consider third-party audits when a suspicious death occurs. Those create an evidentiary trail that can reduce mistrust. And, from a legal perspective, encourage settlements that include mandated policy changes when negligence is found, not just payouts.
That's a good point. Money can't bring someone back, but it can force institutional learning if the right terms are attached. Before we close, I want to bring us back to Kenneka, the human at the center. She was 19. She had a family who loved her. She had a mother who searched hotel rooms and asked questions. The tragedy of a young life lost is the constant ground beneath the technicalities. Andre, In your work with families and about institutional failures, what do you say to Teresa and to families like hers?
I say that their grief deserves respect, their questions deserve answers, and their demands for accountability are legitimate. It's also important to resist the pressure, both from media and from online communities, that pushes families toward public performance or conspiratorial narratives that can harm them. Families need legal support, trauma-informed help, and institutions that answer fully. And communities need to push for policy change so fewer families endure similar tragedies.
Teresa has said publicly she didn't get all the answers she wanted. The settlement closed a chapter, but didn't fully illuminate every shadow. There are still unanswered questions. The tapiromate, the nuances of the footage, the precise series of decisions that allowed a 19-year-old to vanish into an industrial freezer. And that's why this story matters. It sits at the intersection of individual vulnerability, institutional duty, public suspicion, and systemic inequities in whose deaths prompt rapid action and whose do not.
Yeah, and as listeners, we should hold multiple truths at once. That Kenneka's death was ruled accidental and that the hotel's failures were consequential. That social media scrutiny can be both helpful and harmful, and that families deserve both transparency and protection from speculation. Those aren't contradictory, they're complicated.
Complicated is exactly the right word. Before we wrap, a few listener-facing notes. 1. If you're moved by this case and want to help prevent similar tragedies, ask hotels about their safety protocols. As a consumer, hold businesses accountable. 2. If you're drawn into online sleuthing, remember that conjecture can harm live people, families, witnesses who are still healing. 3. If you want to learn more, consult the reporting we used in the show notes, the Washington Post timelines, CBS Chicago coverage of the lawsuit, Newsweek on the surveillance footage, and public court filings summarized by the Chicago Tribune and local reporting. We'll link to those.
And a small plea. If you're organizing or protesting, center the family's voice. Ask, what do they want? What would help them? Sometimes the best support is to help build pressure for transparency and policy change, not to amplify unverified claims.
Maya Ellison here. Sorry, Maya. Sorry, I'm Maya. We'll keep listening. Andre, thank you. This is painful work, but necessary. Any final thought?
Just this. Kenneka was a person with a mother and siblings. Policies and cameras matter, but so do empathy and restraint. Demand answers, yes, but do it in ways that respect the living. That's the only path forward toward accountability that heals.
Thank you, Andre. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for this episode of Still Unanswered. If this episode resonated, subscribe so you don't miss future stories where we interrogate the gaps between official explanations and lived reality. For now, I want you to hold Kenneka's name, not as a mystery to be solved by conspiracy, but as a young woman whose death prompted questions about how institutions protect or fail to protect vulnerable people. Kenneka L. Jenkins. May she be remembered for the life she lived, not only for the footage that followed her last steps. This is Still Unanswered. I'm Maya Ellison.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you to the listeners. Take care of each other. Take care of each other.